One woman on her way to a legacy of a peaceful evolution of the rights of Native Americans. A Native American woman who stood up amongst the orders of government officials in order to retrieve the natural rights her and her people were endowed to, found her way to represent the leader of the Ponca tribe, Standing Bear, in a courthouse where a biased opinion was presented towards her people. Suzette was the first Native American woman to publicly speak up for Indian rights.
Well, I think she was had a tremendous impact on Native American history. She came at a time when there was a lot of upheaval in Indian country. She was born when they were still confining them to reservations. Most of them were not citizens. Some of them had gotten citizens from the Dawes Act, but for the most part, they were not citizens. And so you had Native American people serving and defending the Constitution when they received no benefits from it. And so when they got back, there were a lot of Native people and white progressives who wanted to change that.
Indians had inhabited the land first. At a young age, a woman being brought up to her legacy that she had no vision of, the daughter of Joseph LaFlesche, head chief of the Omaha tribe, was brought up within a perspective of the common people. She had an incentive to help her tribe when she saw problems arising. Her father brought her to the Ponca tribe territory known as Oklahoma one day, and armed government officials, people who were strangers in her eyes, forced her people, including her grandmother, out of their land. This was in the year 1855, where Suzette's people who she had brought up with, were unwillingly escorted to a painstaking walk from Oklahoma to a reservation in Nebraska, which would become known as the Trail of Tears. Suzette witnessed firsthand her people and family being persecuted and put into exile as they were directed and forced out of their homes into designated areas thousands of miles away.
Like I said, 90% of whatever land they had was lost. Until the Indian Reorganization Act stopped it. So anybody who was taking a stand for it were coming from this mindset that it was going to be helpful to them, to Native people, to sort of step into the mainstream society. That's how they were raised. That's how they were taught. They were sent to boarding schools who fed this to them. So it's sort of normal for them to feel that way. If you put yourself in their spot.
Suzette must have thought to herself that the officials had no right to push them out of their homes. At the arrival to the Ponca tribe, Suzette witnessed suffering, sickness, starvation, which just led her passion to make the people know how the government was treating the Poncas. Suzette and Ponca chief Standing Bear went on crusades to spread word of the injustice and raise awareness for their rights. We found current stories of the still-standing Omaha tribe of Nebraska. Casey Camp Horinek, a modern-day Southern Ponca, allowed Pamela Parker to interview for Net Television, where she said, quote, "It was our Holocaust. It was our march to the concentration camps that the United States government had created, and we knew it, and we knew our way of life was gone." Standing Bear's son was among the casualties due to the location change. Standing Bear, among with 65 other Poncas, traveled back to their territory where they would present his son with a proper burial at their native tribunal land. Suzette and her family supported this. However, by leaving their designated reservation without military consent, Standing Bear was said to have defied the government, and the War Department was notified in order to return them to reservation and arrest them. They denied this command, and this action became seen as a possible act of war. The Ponca tribe, along with Standing Bear, were arrested and taken into custody. While the Ponca were being held captive, Thomas Tibble began to stir up support and, in court, fought for the Poncas. Suzette had worked with Thomas before, as she had worked for a project on the injustice of Native treatment in the Omaha Herald. Suzette eventually married Thomas and joined him in his fight and joined forces to help start discussion in Congress. Together, they toured to England and Scotland in 1886.
and not a child or thing or merely an animal, as some of the world would-be civilizers have termed him, fights for his property, liberty, and life, they call him a savage. When the first settlers in this country fought for their property, liberty, and lives, they were called heroes. When the Indian in fighting this great nation wins a battle, it is called a massacre. When the great nation fighting the Indian wins, it's called a victory. Suzette LaFlèche, March 10, 1880. Suzette testified for the Poncas and also wrote multiple articles about the case. The native won, and the court stated that the natives were allowed to live wherever they please. The court's decision was the first one acknowledging the human rights of Native Americans, and stated that Native Americans were free to choose where they wanted to live. A quote says, "You know that they would have been less than a man if they had submitted meekly like slaves to the authority of this government official at Washington." Suzette disagreed that the Indians be separated and excluded from their rights because they pushed away geographically and therefore not considered citizens. Indians prevented from earning own living and pushed away from civilization, being ignored by government, and being labeled as an outcast and non-applicable to any rights or property in the country. She published the statements of Indian Territory in the Sioux City papers, and wrote letters to keep track of account. Thomas Tibbles and Suzette both did. Suzette said that the native head chiefs never gave the soldiers permission to take over land and kick them out.
Standing Bear won the trial and won the rights to be recognized and legally judged as a person and U.S. citizen in the eyes of the law. Suzette LaFlèche and Standing Bear went on a lecture tour after the trial, pleading the case of the Ponca homeland. On the tour with Tibbles, Suzette got to talk with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who helped her get in front of a congressional committee to talk about the Native Americans' problems. Suzette continued to write, lecture, and advocate Indian concerns to the government. She later became known as the first woman to speak out for the cause of Native Americans. She started off as merely a Native American who was resented and not even considered human. It was out of order to speak up in this position, and none before her did. And so when someone being expected to have a weak and analytical personality stood up, it was revolutionary. She went from being unrecognized to being nationally heard by thousands. People wanted to hear what she had to say and showed up. Back at home and before the trial, this was unheard of for Suzette. Speaking out at the trial was the first glimpse of freedom of speech and the urge, the need of self-expression and standing up for what she thought was right, no matter the consequences. This was thrilling for her. It was a whole new world. Suzette went on to make many tribes stand up for themselves. She motivated them and filled them with spirit. Through this, she gained more confidence and looked for more challenges that came her way. She looked to spread her word and eventually did so nationally. At the age of 25, Suzette became known as the advocate for Native American rights as well as the representative for the Indian rights movement. While on tour, Suzette reunited with Thomas Henry Tibbles, who exchanged letters with her during the trial and who documented all her speeches and sayings. In 1882, Suzette LaFlèche became Suzette LaFlèche Tibbles. He continued the rest of his tour with her into the East, and in 1886 they went on the 10-month tour to the United Kingdom. Their ideas and concerns were received by many government committees who partnered up with them to make a difference in their own communities. Suzette went through a great deal of spotlight for someone of a small reservation who were originally undeserving to even be considered in the eyes of the government. Suzette continued her writing and spoke out for her people. Once she had her first glimpse of being capable of spreading her point across, she never stopped. She sped up the process of liberty and justice for her people. As did she form an idea that had never been thought of before. She did what no one else had ever done. Suzette was recognized in the Nebraska Hall of Fame, where she still stands. She died in Bancroft, where she and Thomas had settled down to re-engage with their tribes. She died on May 26, 1903. However, her legacy lives on, and she was recognized and honored by the Senate, being remembered as the first woman to take a stand for Native American rights.